Creative Babble.
Hey everyone, it's Javier. I know it's been a while, but Neal and I have been really busy. I've had my hands full with my recent series on Pretend, and Neal has been writing a book. But never fear, we have already recorded a handful of Ponzi Playbook episodes that we're putting together right now. But in the meantime, I produced this episode called the White Collar Support Group for Pretend, and I think you're going to love it. It's kind of a Ponzi Playbook adjacent story. So in the meantime, while we work on the new episodes, check out this new episode from Pretend, the White Collar Support Group.
When I got out of prison, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to help people.
This is Jeff Grant, the founder of the first and only white collar support group that I know of anyway.
I decided to apply to seminary, divinity school, and then got a master's of divinity and became a reverend. And so there I am, a Jewish reverend. Don't ask me how that works out. I don't know.
Jeff was lost and religion gave him direction, a sense of purpose. So he started working in churches and volunteering at criminal justice organizations.
And in the course of doing that, we founded the White Collar Support Group and our ministry that's devoted to supporting people who've been prosecuted for white collar crimes and their families. And that really just took off.
A white collar support group? Yes. Think of it as AA, but for Ponzi schemers, corrupt CEOs, investment fraudsters, insider traders, those kind of guys. The kind of people who would never be caught lifting your wallet on a bus, but don't think twice about embezzling funds from your company's account or draining your life savings. For the most part, these are privileged individuals who are well educated, had high-paying jobs, and were in a position of power. Of all the people, these might be the last guys you would think that would seek this kind of help. After all, a corrupt company executive isn't constantly being profiled and stigmatized by the judicial system the way a poverty-driven criminal is. No one is clutching their purse when they walk by or posting on Nextdoor when a man wearing khakis and a button-down shirt walks into their neighborhood. Shouldn't they just be able to bounce back up? Don't they have cash hidden in some shell company in the Cayman Islands? And most of these guys, they get a slap on the wrist anyway. According to a study published in the Yale Law Journal, white-collar criminals in the Southern District of New York, where many of these cases are tried, serve less time in prison or no prison at all than what's being recommended by the sentencing guidelines. Why do they need a support group? Unlike poverty-driven offenders, white-collar criminals had everything, and now that they got caught, they want our sympathy? But it's actually not that simple. Maybe the problem is that when we envision a white-collar criminal, we think of Bernie Madoff, Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, or our old pal, Frank Abagnale. The median loss for insider trading is about $8,000. And for tax evasion, it's about $300,000. That's not chump change, but it pales in comparison with the multi-million-dollar schemes that you hear in the news. For the non-Bernie Madoffs of the world, getting prosecuted has real-world consequences. One day, they are accepted members of society, and now they have shattered reputations, the loss of relationships, and the stress of going to prison. And then they have the long-term difficulties of reintegrating into society. The most surprising thing about today's episode is that any one of us could get caught up in a white-collar crime. And unlike some of the most famous offenders, you might not have the resources to get out of it. We're going to hear what led Jeff Grant to start his white-collar support group. And in another segment, you'll hear a man's story of insider trading. How one bad decision led to another, and how he was able to turn his life around after becoming a felon. I'm Javier Leiva, and this is Pretend, stories about real people pretending to be someone else.
I didn't grow up with money, but I was certainly materialistic.
This is Jeff Grant again, the founder of the White Collar Support Group.
And I was kind of in a culture where, Jewish Long Island, money was important, and how successful you were was pretty much gauged by how much money you made.
I often think of white collar offenders having the same characteristics as an entrepreneur, right? Like the characteristics are the same, except that maybe the white collar offender chose a different route.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of similarities. I mean, because I wasn't just a lawyer, I had other interests too. I owned a restaurant. I was in the health club business. I was in the real estate business. I did a lot of things. When I look back at it, I was really much more of an opportunist than I was an entrepreneur.
You described yourself as an opportunist, but also it sounds like you're a risk taker too.
I think that's generally true. But not only was I a risk taker back then, but as I got hooked on opiates, then they were disinhibitors. I was, for a while, I was willing to take a lot more risk, and until, of course, it severely impacted my judgment, and then I was taking too much risk.
As an attorney, did you ever have a nickname for when you practiced law?
What a great question. Well, I called myself a killer or an assassin. I think I called myself an assassin.
Why is that?
Because for me, I didn't really know better. For me, it was kill or be killed. I was out to win. I was out to kill every single time.
You can't burn everything down, right? You need to have some bridges.
I burned everything down, almost everything down.
Describe the pinnacle of your career. What was the highest point? Like the time you look back and you're like, man, I was crushing it.
I had become general counsel to a large real estate equities company. I was making gobs of money. It was a great run for a while.
And then on the flip side, tell me when things just started falling apart.
Well, I would say they fell apart mostly after I had a sports injury, and as a result of that sports injury, I got hooked on opioids. First on Demerol, and then later on it was OxyContin. But I was running around to different drugstores and going to different doctors and getting different, it was exhausting.
Highly addictive.
Highly addictive. And I knew it. I wasn't, I was just powerless to do anything about it.
Yeah. Even if you know it, once you're in it, you can't get out. And just out of curiosity, what sport were you playing when you got injured?
Basketball. I played basketball every afternoon or every day of my life. I was 32 years old. And I ruptured my Achilles tendon and went right down.
Isn't that weird how something like that, really, that was such a pivotal moment in your life, right? Because
absolutely.
Once you get injured, that's when you get addicted to the painkillers.
Yep.
That's when you start making really bad decisions. Yep. Isn't that crazy how you could trace it back to one incident? It wasn't just the addiction problem that you had, but you also started getting mounting debt, right?
Well, I mean, little by little, as I was unable to show up to work and I was unable to be kind of I wasn't watching out for my own pocketbook, but I still was living a big lifestyle. So I probably had too many employees, too much overhead, too much personal overhead. And so the debt started to mount up. I was becoming massively overweight. I was vomiting up blood, having the anxiety of having to show up on a Monday morning. I didn't look well. It was a mess. 6 or 7 or 8 years of that, and could wake up owing a lot of money and not having the personal resources or the intellectual resources to be able to find my way out of it with any kind of elegance.
The weight of all that debt left Jeff Grant with few choices. Either admit that he was in over his head or find some way to keep the plate spinning. He chose to keep the plate spinning.
Because I had invaded the escrow account to cover payroll. And I wasn't negative on it. I was just using it kind of as a wallet to go back and forth from. And
so in other words, what you're saying is that you have clients, you have to get payroll paid, and so you're dipping into clients' accounts in order to pay for the payroll. Is that
exactly? And because we were doing a lot of real estate transactions and things like that, there were probably millions of dollars sitting there. And I have no idea why I thought it was a good idea to go to those funds to be able to cover. Mostly, I'm sure it was because I was desperate and I was stoned. Once I did it, there was really no turning back. So I was under a multi-year investigation by the New York State Grievance Committee looking into those transactions. And then 9/11 hit. Business got worse. My drug addiction started to ramp up even more. And a couple of months later, there were advertisements on the TV and on the radio for small business loans to cover business losses as a result of 9/11. I called them up and I told them what my situation was, and I could not help myself but to misrepresent my business and tell them that I had an office about a block from Ground Zero.
And that was in order to obtain an SBA loan,
exactly,
right? Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I certainly didn't need to do that. I would have been approved anyway. In July of 2002, I resigned my law license and took my last drugs and tried to kill myself. Went to rehab. And then when I got out of rehab 7 weeks later, I started going into AA, which I've been in now for 22 years. I was in AA for about 20 months, and I got a phone call from the investigators, the two federal investigators, who told me that there was a warrant out for my arrest in connection with the misrepresentations I had made on that small business loan. I was already down. I was already out. I'd already hit my bottom. I was already getting sober. And then this hit me like a bomb went off, that I was in legal trouble.
And you ended up pleading guilty to wire fraud and money laundering because of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And how long of a sentence did the judge give you?
The judge sentenced me to 18 months in federal prison, of which I served 13 and a half months in Allenwood Low Security Correctional Institution in Pennsylvania.
I think when people think of white-collar criminals,
mm-hmm.
they think of Bernie Madoff.
Mm-hmm.
They think of like Ponzi schemers, people who do these large-scale schemes, right? A lot of the people that you talk to have found themselves in these situations. It was maybe a bad opportunity that
mm-hmm.
something that they stumbled upon rather than this big scheme.
Yeah.
My cousin, going back to the story about my cousin, he went to federal prison too for his crimes. But he called me from prison and he would describe a very cushy environment.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was doing yoga, playing tennis, had a balcony. Was that your experience? Or
that was not my experience. I do appreciate the fact that it is some people's experience, and more so back then, by the way. Because a lot of people, a lot of white-collar criminals do get designated to camps. I did not. I was designated to a low-security prison, which had actual bars on the windows and controlled movements, and it was not cushy at all. That said, it wasn't an altogether negative experience. It was a little frightening, but I survived.
When Jeff Grant got out of prison, there was no white-collar support group. He just had to figure things out on his own.
For me, I had to be willing to start over. So I don't know if you remember, Javier, but when you get out of college, or you get out of high school, you get out of college, you don't know what you're going to do. You don't know. You got to start sending resumes out. You got to do whatever you got to do to kind of get that first job, and then that leads you to the next job, and then that leads you to the next job. And now imagine it's 25 years later, and in a way, we're still mourning our old life. We're afraid of what is going to happen, and so there's this fear. There's a trauma about the past. There's fear of the future, and what we really have to do is you have to kind of be where your feet are. Okay, I need a job. What are the things I need to do to get a job? And a lot of people will not will not lower themselves down to the base place where they need to be. Their egos get in the way, and I was willing to do anything. I mean, in the first jobs I got, I was collating papers. I was stapling. I would do anything. There's no job that was too small for me. It didn't take them long when I was working there to figure out. Maybe it took them 3 weeks to figure out. Wait a second. We have a seasoned lawyer here who we can exploit. And they started giving me projects to do because they were paying me almost nothing. But I was happy to do it because I needed to get back on my feet, and I needed to start making connections, and I needed to start making my way through the world again. But not everybody's willing to do that, or they don't even know that they're their own worst enemy. If you take a person who has two separate lives, let's just say, for example, in their first life, they were a hedge fund manager, and in their second life, they're a janitor. It's hard for that hedge fund manager to take the ego hit and become a janitor. Okay, or maybe he's even a janitor for a while. Okay, but it's not so hard for a janitor to want to become a hedge fund manager. It's really only the order of things and the way that we place value on these things. I was willing to become a janitor. I mean, in prison, that's what I did. I worked in the mop closet. I cleaned out garbage cans, and I was grateful for that. And so when I got home, I would do anything. And I think that served me well. And even now, in friends and people who are on our white collar support group, the ones who take jobs in warehouses, or they're working on the floor at Home Depot, they're doing whatever they have to do. Those are the people I know are going to succeed, because they're not going to be working in the warehouse that long. What they're doing now is they're retraining themselves. They're getting themselves back into the workplace. They're getting over their trauma from prison, and they're putting some food on the table. There's a lot of people who don't.
It's a great attitude. And just hearing you talk about it spells out the importance of resetting somebody's mind and expectations, right? Having this support group, I could see how it could orient somebody to start over, to reset their expectations, right? Well, it's very interesting.
I mean, there's no question that isolation is the killer. And just being alone with ourselves, being alone in our own heads, and coming into community is what saves us. We've had 1,200 people join our support group. We've been doing it for 8.5 years. We've had over 425 weekly meetings on Monday nights, but far more people never call upon us or never join the support group meetings than have. But a lot of people who've been to prison for white collar crimes, they are estranged from their networks. There's no way they have those networks anymore. So why wouldn't you join a network that is available to you and see how it goes?
When we return from the break, we're going to talk about another white collar offender who found a community at the Monday night white collar support group meetings.
I'm Tom Harden.
Tom Harden has an average name. He looks like an average guy working at an average financial planning firm. But after his conviction for insider trading, Tom Harden is best known as
FBI informant Tipper X, the most important informant in securities fraud history.
After his conviction, Tom Harden says that he felt like he lost total control of his life.
So I was trying to figure out how to bounce back professionally. I mean, white collar criminals are viewed very poorly. Most other countries in the world are like, you have the felony, you paid the consequences. I was looking at what to do, and then connected with another felon who I met. So he told me there was in this white collar support group, and started dialing into Monday night calls. So every Monday night on Zoom now, we have people from all over the country and some people from all over the world who are in a similar type of situation. Maybe the FBI just approached them. Maybe it's just at the start of this, or so many of them are looking at prison, they're being sentenced to prison. They can talk to other people Monday night who have actually gone to that prison. And instead of paying a prison consultant thousands of dollars, and some of those prison consultants, it's a very not ethical profession to charge somebody a lot of money and, create fear for them about what's going to happen, on the inside, your white collar. And so there's a very big vulture industry.
Can you believe that? There's a thing called prison consulting. But Tom says that the white collar support group is not about profiting from someone when they're already knocked down.
We have this free group Monday nights, it's every week. And so it's grown and grown and grown. And you realize a lot of people are suffering in silence. I don't want to see anybody when I'm going through this. I have a lot of shame and guilt, and my social network is totally gone, my old one. And you kind of have to start a new network. And it's just a great group to actually be able for me to start a new network of people going through similar things. Hey, how did somebody get back on their feet professionally? That's probably the number one thing people struggle with. Like, okay, what am I going to do with my life? Especially a young person who hasn't accumulated wealth yet. It's called the white collar support group, but it's not people who are big honchos on Wall Street. White people might think about white collar. It's somebody in middle America working for a dentist that embezzled because if they had some cost they had to pay, in their personal life that got out of control, or there was addiction problems and they made a bad choice. And so they're a white collar criminal. They're not running a bank on Wall Street.
You don't have the Wolf of Wall Street on this Zoom call, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So how did Tom Harden get wrapped into this mess in the first place? How did he ultimately become Tipper X? Tipper X was one of Wall Street's biggest mysteries. At the time, everyone wondered, who the heck is a secret witness who brought down one of the biggest insider trading cases in the US? Tom Harden unintentionally found himself at the center of this investigation that ultimately brought down billionaire Raj Rajaratnam and his hedge fund, the Galleon Group. But it wasn't by design. It all started with what he considered harmless insider trading.
With insider trading, it's like, well, I'm just buying it before everybody else. You really feel like there's no victim because who am I really? Am I stealing money? I'm just buying it from somebody anonymous in the stock market who sold it to me. Like, I'm not hurting anybody. It's not like the visceral feeling maybe of a Ponzi scheme.
Insider trading sounds really complicated, but at the end of the day, it's just someone buying or selling securities such as stocks, bonds, options, based on non-public information about that company. So let's say you learn that a company is about to announce a major breakthrough, which is expected to raise a stock price. If you buy shares of that company before the information becomes public, and you make a profit when the stock rises, you've committed insider trading. It's really that simple. Just ask Martha Stewart.
I'm just buying it before everybody else. I feel like everybody's doing it.
And it wasn't a whole lot of money. He just thought, I'll just take a couple crumbs off the table. It's not that bad, right? The government says that Tom Harden, who worked as a managing director at a hedge fund, cashed in on secrets from companies such as Google, Hilton. But one day, while dropping off his dry cleaning, 2 FBI agents approached him. That's when his world just fell apart. Tom Harden wasn't a mastermind criminal. He didn't have any trusts or offshore accounts with a small fortune waiting for him. Everything he's ever worked for was gone. His youth was gone, his career was gone, and his marriage was in shambles. Tom Harden grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia.
Father worked at Coca-Cola. Mother stayed at home with the 3 boys. I'm the oldest of 3 brothers, middle-class, suburban Atlanta family. I was interested kind of more in the accounting side of business when I started at Penn Wharton. Most of my successful parents of friends were like CPAs or tax lawyers or that type of thing. By sophomore year, some of my friends said they had been trading the stock market. And since they were like 15 years old, I just started following like the Wall Street Journal, joined the stock picking club at UPenn, and really became enamored by the market. So I knew I wanted to be in the stock picking world. I started investment banking in Los Angeles. And after my 4th all-nighter as an analyst, low man on the totem pole, the managing director leaves the office, gives you the work at 5 o'clock that he or she wants on their desk in the morning, and you just crank all night. So
it was the early 2000s, in the middle of the internet stock bubble, when Tom Harden started working in hedge funds. Pretty quickly, he realized that some of his coworkers were getting their hands on information that wasn't public yet. They did this by hiring analysts who used to work at Silicon Valley companies. These analysts would reach out to old contacts to get details about upcoming mergers, acquisitions, and quarterly earnings before they were ever announced.
If you have perfect information before everybody else, you can be long the stock, betting it's going to go up, or short the stock, betting it's going to go down. So I know this is going on. That's not really my world.
Tom Harden was more of a long-term investor, but he says that all changed when he got his second job at a different firm.
My boss made our goals very short term, from these 1 to 3 year investment horizons to monthly. He came into my office one day and said, "Tom, I know we're investing longer term. We just lost money in the first quarter of our fund. We have to start looking for shorter term opportunities to make money every month, or we may not survive." I just assume anything goes. He knows insider trading is going on. If I were to ever get information about a trade, I'm not even sure at that point if I would have crossed the line or would have talked to him. It was this ambiguous message from the boss to do what it takes. Me not asking questions at all sets the stage for a few more months goes by. I receive a call from an analyst who had worked for this guy, Rajaratnam, who was probably the most famous guy later to be charged with insider trading in these hedge fund cases. She said, "Tom, you'd made me a lot of money over the last few years on some great ideas. I have something for you. You can't tell anybody." Now, that should have raised at least a yellow flag. Like, what is she about to say? She was always full of rumors. And she said, a Moody's analyst who was roommates with her cousin told her that the company was going to be acquired in a few weeks. Here's the date. Here's the price. Here's the private equity firm. If anybody listening ever gets a call like that, hang up the phone. That's dark information. To me, it actually set off alarm bells the first time, like, oh, this actually sounds not like a rumor, like specific information. So in the back of my mind, on that first phone call, I said, I'm not trading this. But later that day, I was talking to a friend at another firm, and he's a trader. He said, "Are you hearing anything out there I could trade?" And I said, look, I'm not trading this, but she just called me. I told him everything. There, I've actually violated insider trading laws by tipping, and I haven't even traded yet. I have no idea what he's going to do with it. I sort of viewed that as a gift to him, like, hey, you're a friend, do with it what you want. I'm not trading it, so my hands are clean.
Right. You weren't making money off of it. You were just telling him,
exactly.
hey, I had this meeting with this woman and she started giving me this information. I don't know if it's true or not. But right there, you're committing a crime, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that is the first rationalization. It's like, I'm not trading it. If he wants to make money, that's his problem. If the SEC were to ever look at his trades, that's on him. Apparently, he tells his whole firm. The guy next to him, the big trader at the firm, buys 500,000 shares. I think within an hour of my phone call, the FBI would figure that out later. Like, he would buy these call options, which are leverage bets on the stock price. And then I see the stock actually starting to tick up. And I start to get a little bit of like FOMO, like, oh my God, these guys, somebody's buying this stock. It's starting to tick up every day a little bit. I know the woman that called me has an enormous position in her account. The guy that I called calls me back and he says, "Dude, are you in? We're all in. If it happens, this will be amazing. If it doesn't happen, we probably won't even lose money. We'll just sell it." And at my firm, the opportunity to commit the fraud, I could buy a stock in our portfolio and not have to talk to my boss as long as it was less than 1% of the assets we manage for clients. I remember pulling up Excel and doing what's 0.9% of our assets, and then how much stock at that stock price would I have to buy to get that position in there. And just a few keystrokes right there, putting that position in our portfolio, I've committed securities fraud. Didn't go to the office planning to commit fraud, didn't have this master plan. How am I going to do this without my boss knowing? I literally put it in our company portfolio, kind of thinking maybe my boss would check me. Maybe he'd say, "Hey, what is this new position? What are you working on?" And I can tell you, I totally rationalized it.
Tom Harden felt like he was just getting a head start. To him, it seemed like there was no real victim. He was just getting a good spot on the track before everyone else started running. It didn't feel like outright theft, not like a Ponzi scheme where you knowingly take someone's personal life savings. Insider trading felt more like finding a shortcut that others could take if they found it.
I'm not going to say I'm insider trading because that would make me feel bad. I'm just taking a flyer. It's all good. I'll do it one time. So extremely poor self-talk here. And so often what happens is these rationalizations start to feel that cycle, just like that rationalization engine continues to go.
At first, it was just like, hey, I got this information, I'm passing it along. And then you're like, maybe I'll dip my toes in the water, right? And it's below the threshold, so it's probably okay. And if it wasn't okay, my boss would flag it and tell me it wasn't. At any point during this time period, like if you could go back to that day when you were doing the Excel spreadsheet of 0.9, were you nervous? Did you feel like you were doing something wrong, or were you still thinking everything was cool?
I was a little nervous, and not so much actually of the insider trading, because I just felt these guys must know Roger Rotnam, the big billionaire, has been doing this for years. Like, it's, to me, I start to rationalize it's not even being prosecuted. Like, people know this guy's doing it. So if I were to buy a small position, I would definitely not be caught. So the rationalization started right then, calculating the Excel. I remember having a passing thought, like, this is just dropping a penny in the Grand Canyon. Nobody would ever know this small of a position would ever be, flagged or anything like that.
How much money are we talking about when you're doing the 0.9?
So we managed $100 million. So it's $999,000 position. So it's not in my personal account or anything like that. It's in our company account, our company funds. Compared to the millions people were making, I felt like that was smaller. And I really was most concerned about what would my boss say. I mean, it was pretty adventurous of me to even do this, because if my boss had the moral compass, he would have come in and said, hey, where'd you get the information? You're fired. Like, this is not something we do. So it was pretty like forward of me to even think about doing what I kind of calculated. Well, he knows it's going on. Everybody's doing it. If he has a problem, maybe he'll just sell the stock and tell me not to do it again.
But
that was the back and forth.
In a way, you're actually helping the company out, because he told you, hey, we need some money now, right? Not long term.
Exactly.
I'm getting the impression that you're not typing this stuff and looking over your shoulder and sweating. You're thinking you're doing something good for the job, right?
Yeah, and that's so often what it is with a lot of these cases. Yeah.
How does it snowball from there?
Yeah, so it's in the portfolio. Maybe a few more weeks goes by. I remember before the stock market opened, trading in the stock was halted. That means news is coming in this company, Kronos. Word for word, it hit the newswire. It was the exact information. So I kept telling myself, maybe this is a rumor. I mean, it sounds like specific information, but she's never called with anything like this. So maybe she was just trying to make herself look interesting with some specific information, but it's really a rumor. And then it hits the Bloomberg, the private equity company, the exact dollar amount she told me. And I remember getting a little bit of a stomach turn, like, oh boy, this is happening. And then that quickly switched to an adrenaline rush. It was a weird mix of feelings, like, now I'm part of this in group, like these guys that are playing this game. Now I have status in the next stock conference I'm going to, where I'm actually going to mention to these guys that I also suspect are doing this, like, hey, I'm part of your group. In my late 20s, I guess my brain maybe was just fully developed by then or not developed. Like, that was like, wow, I'm part of this illicit in group. But I still had to go to my morning meeting with my boss, and we'd always meet 15 minutes before the stock market opened. The stock is up 30% on this small position. And all he says is, oh, it's one of those. So I'm not getting fired. He's not even asking questions. He's my mentor. He's 15 years older than me. That just further fueled, like, I'm probably going to do it again. If it were to happen again, he's fine with it. And it happens 3 more times. She calls 0.9%. On the third, giving me this information. That's
what I was going to ask you. Like, why is this woman just giving you all this information for nothing, right? Yeah. Like,
what a nice friend. And like, she had told me over the years, my sort of thematic ideas, like own Google, short the yellow pages. That doesn't short-term play out, but that plays out over time. Like, she liked having me in her network for these more longer-term ideas. And then eventually on the third trade, she's like, all right, these aren't for free. If we want to continue this, my source needs $15,000. Instead of saying, never call me again, I said, let me figure it out. So the guy that I was sharing it with, my friend, I said, here's the situation. If this is going to continue, this person wants $15,000. He's like, I'll figure it out. I guess he goes to the people, gets cash together, and then he meets me at Grand Central Station in New York. And we go downstairs at Grand Central, very clandestine. He slides a FedEx envelope of $15,000 of cash across to me.
Somehow, Tom Harden had to get all this cash to California. The first hurdle was getting through airport security.
And I thought, well, I have to get this through security. Let me go to the bathroom outside security and put it in my chest, my pockets, and my socks. This is 2007. It wasn't like the screening machines today where it circles you. You just walk through those metal detectors, walk right through with the money on my body, went to the restroom. When my flight was called to board, there was actually 2 TSA agents at the gate. Back, 6 years after 9/11, they're still randomly doing maybe checks or having a presence of TSA. And I saw them at my gate and I thought, oh my God, they totally saw what I was doing in the bathroom with this money or something and they're going to stop me. So I try not to make eye contact. They stop me. They take my carry-on, flip through it, and the female agent looks at the other agent. She opens the envelope, sees the cash, and she looks at the other guy and looks at me and says, "Sir, have a nice flight." Later, somebody told me it's actually not illegal domestically to carry that much cash. I was panicking.
What does $15,000 look like?
So it was enough to fit my chest, in my front pockets, my back pockets, and my socks. I had just enough, 5'10". I guess that's like where the surface area is covered.
Wow. And so you got away with it. I mean, I bet you were sweating bullets.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I was just going to say, hey, I'm going to Vegas because I was going to California for this conference.
So, wow. So you get the money to this woman.
Yeah. And I say, never again. I'm never doing cash payoffs like this again. You won't believe what happened. And she's like, all right, I'll take care of it. And there was a final tip from her that I guess she took care of, 0.9% position. So this was over a 7-month period. My firm, I think, made just over $1 million on these trades, and we managed 100 million. We weren't swinging for the fences. We weren't saying, oh, Tom had the first one, 0.9%. Let's go 5% or 10% on the next one. It was all these 0.9%. But to your point, like it was helping short-term performance, which is what my mandate was. And at the end of 2007, the woman calls me, oh my God, the SEC has contacted me about one of the trades. And then I thought, oh, what would I say? I had been told by other people, like, if the SEC calls you, just give them some excuse. Oh, I read an analyst report. That's why I bought it. They have so much on their plate. Just give them an excuse. So I was preparing for a call from the SEC. I started looking at why I might have bought these stocks at this time, found some analyst reports. This company is cheap. Oh, that's why I bought it, backdating my research. So I had a plan. A few months after she called me, she said she was in New York and said, Tom, we need to have lunch. I want to go over what I might say. And she meets me for lunch. She's sitting very close to me. And she says, Tom, what would you say if you were ever asked about these trades? And she said, Tom, this was illegal insider trading. And she's sitting very close to me. So, and then a month later, I'm leaving my apartment to drop off some dry cleaning, step on the sidewalk, and this guy behind me says, are you Tom? 2 FBI agents, dark suits, wallets out, FBI, come sit down with us.
At the time, Tom didn't think that the woman he met for lunch was wearing a wire, but now that realization is starting to sink in.
But now that the FBI might face, hey, we know about your 4 trades. We know that you were just down in Atlanta visiting your baby nephew, and they knew his name for his baptism that weekend. And my first thought was, oh my God, my parents are going to kill me. What are they going to say? And then I thought, oh my God, my wife's going to leave me. She had no idea about the 4 trades. We just got married, young couple. She's going to leave me. And I thought, holy crap, this might impact my career. Oh my God, I might be going to prison. And I start making implicating statements. Yes, I made those 4 trades. In fact, there was a cash payoff. And the FBI agent pulled his pen out. He's like, oh, that's interesting. Go on, go on. So I wasn't playing tough guy, like, prove it. What do you have? I was just spilling the beans. And they said, okay, settle down. Like I was talking for a while. And they said, are you aware this is going on? And I kind of looked at them like, guys, this is rampantly going on. Everybody's doing it, which is my rationalization. And they said, we think you can help us build these cases. And I took his card and said, should I talk to an attorney? And they said, we'll let you know when you can do that. I left, went to the office. My face was totally white. I was late to work, but it was 2008. So my face was white. It was the worst stock market in 75 years.
Right.
No red flags.
How would he live with this fear, this guilt? He asked himself, who have I become? He heard that 2 other people in his same exact position who were being questioned by the feds couldn't handle the pressure and even ended their own lives.
I converted to Catholicism for my wife to get married a year before, went to Catholic confession at St. Patrick's in New York on a Tuesday afternoon, told the priest everything. And I should have talked to a lawyer too, but the priest said my penance was to help them clean up the industry. He's not a lawyer, but that was kind of my penance. So I looked for spiritual guidance before legal guidance first.
Tom Harden took the priest's advice and he called the FBI.
I called him. I was so naive, though, still 28, 29. I'm like, what does it mean to help you? I wasn't really connecting the dots. And they said, what you're going to have to do is have lunch with us. And they brought a little piece of metal that looked like a battery in the BlackBerry when we used to carry Blackberries. And I'm like, what is that, a BlackBerry battery? And they're like, how naive is this guy? This is a body wire. You're going to have to get people in conversations. So I said, well, I don't understand. Like, how do I help you? And they said, who are the worst actors? And I start rattling off people who I think their business model is insider trading. And they nod their heads like, oh, that's interesting. And so I mentioned a few guys. They're like, well, do you know them? I'm like, these are 48-year-old centillionaire guys in Silicon Valley. I'm 29 in New York, but I know guys that work for them. Maybe I could say I'm interviewing for a job, try to meet them and learn about how they do it. And they're like, that's a great plan. I start getting meetings at coffee shops with these hedge fund managers. Every time I met with somebody at a coffee shop, the FBI was already there at a table a few next from me, away from me, just making sure I wasn't sliding a piece of paper like the movie Wolf of Wall Street. I'm wearing a wire.
Like they wanted to visualize.
Yeah. So they wanted to visualize it, but I wasn't doing that. I'd wait for that person to leave and then hand the recording device to them. Every time they'd say, Tom, you're not doing a good job. I was like, hey, it's my first time doing this. There was no training for Tom at the FBI Academy.
You're not Donnie Brasco.
I'm definitely not cut out to be a criminal. Yeah, exactly. So
Tom did this for 2 years. He would go to work and record all these conversations. He would travel to conferences and record those meetings as well. It turns out that being a government mole was another full-time job.
There was one guy who was on to me. I got him in 15 conversations. He'd say nothing, always change the subject. I thought, this guy knows. He invites me for dinner on a Sunday, and he lives outside New York. I call the FBI, and they get really excited. They're like, this guy wants to have dinner. He's high up our list. Let's do it. They gave me the wire. I took the train out to Connecticut. He picks me up, and he's like, Tom, good to see you. I brought swim trunks for you. We're going swimming at my mother's house. So I was not prepared for that.
Swimming with a wire?
We go to this house. He starts disrobing in this room. I excused myself, went to the restroom, took the wire out of my pocket and put it in my jeans and put these swim trunks on. We're walking out to the pool. It's so quiet. I saw a shovel against the house, a hole in the ground. I thought, this guy going to try to kill me or something. We get in the pool and we start playing an awkward game of catch with the tennis ball. He's just pouring it on. And after a few minutes, I just wanted to go home. He's like, Tom, I have to ask you a question. I spoke to an attorney, and the attorney says I have to answer truthfully. I think that was a lie, but I was going to get my cover. I was like, what do you want to know first? And he's like, have you been approached by the SEC? And truthfully, the SEC being the regulator, I could say no, not the SEC. He's like, I just had to make sure you weren't wearing a wire. Sorry about that. He starts confessing everything, but it's not recorded. He's never charged because it wasn't recorded. That was like the moment I felt my life was in danger. Like, I'm not a good swimmer. What's going on? Are there other people here? Like, that was the craziest part.
At this point, Tom Harden didn't have a lawyer. He hadn't found the white collar support group. He was just winging it.
You have this incredible story. You don't come from a crime family. You don't look like a criminal. You don't act like a criminal. But somehow you found yourself in this mess. And looking back, how much money did you personally make? I know the company made a lot of money, but how much money did you personally make out of this whole thing?
So the company made just over $1 million. My personal take as the junior person, if you go down, like what did I actually get of that $1 million? It was $46,000. And at 29 years old, that was the price of professional suicide. When you think about your entire career potential earnings, $46,000, really just at the start of my career, 29, was what I threw it all away for. And I speak at a business school every year for a professor, and he always does the calculation. What if Tom had worked 20 years in the hedge fund industry? I'm like, this is going to make me throw up. I don't want to know. And he does a calculation. So say he's an analyst, say he's a portfolio manager, and he gets to a ballpark net worth of like 23 million.
23 million, my gosh.
It's really like, buying $200 of groceries and then taking a stick of gum and putting it in your pocket and shoplifting the stick of gum at the checkout. It's like, what's the point?
And what were some of the other consequences? Did you actually have to do some jail time?
I didn't, because I helped the FBI out quite a bit. So because it had taken 7 years, that's another thing. It's not like you're sentenced overnight. It's not like Law and Order where you plead guilty and 48 minutes later you're sentenced. It's like, it took about 7 years.
After 7 long, lonely years of waiting for a judge to determine his fate, Tom Harden looked back and realized that his 30s were gone. In your 30s, that's when your white-collar professional career begins to take off. That's when a white-collar professional begins to hit their stride. They move up the corporate ladder. They have a little bit more cheddar in the pocket. But for Tom Harden, that was all gone.
I'd apply for jobs, and I'd be upfront about it too. And wherever I got an N, like with the hiring manager, HR would always be like, we're not hiring this guy because we don't want the PR of hiring
Right.
him. So it was just a non-starter, sentenced to no prison because I helped him out. So still had to take the felony conviction. Even to this day, I have a felony conviction for securities fraud. And another thing is 85% of marriages ended this situation. I've met very few people in my situation going through this that actually the spouse stays with them, because usually the spouse is in it for other reasons. And I'm very lucky. She's kind of the hero of the story, staying with me through all this, which never happens.
And despite all this, Tom and his wife decided to stay together and start a family. In 2009, a year after the FBI approached him about going undercover as Tipper X, their first daughter was born. 4 days later, Raj Rajaratnam, the head of the multi-billion-dollar hedge fund called Galleon, was arrested. Jeff Grant, the founder of the White Collar Support Group, remembers when Tom first attended the meetings.
Tom will tell you he was a wreck. He was unfocused. He had just gone through a lot with Operation Perfect Hedge. He did not get sentenced to go to prison. In some ways, going to prison represents closure. And for people who are sentenced to probation, you'd be surprised how they have their own set of problems. It's like they're out there and they got what they wanted, but it's not a clean bill of health. I mean, the world is still difficult for them. And Tom came in, and at the time, we gave him the opportunity to talk to everybody and to tell his story. And kind of out of that, wound up growing this idea that he had to become a speaker. And he's a professional speaker now. He speaks all over the world, and he's making a living. And he's a tremendous comeback story. And certainly within the White Collar Support Group, we consider him to be a success story.
White collar criminals, a lot of people would say these are the people that deserve the least amount of our sympathy, right? They've been privileged. Why should the public want to, have sympathy for this group or for these group of people? Like, well, what do you say to that?
Well, first of all, it's a very misunderstood and underrepresented group in terms of advocacy, in terms of awareness. People who are prosecuted for white-collar crimes, people who commit white-collar crimes, have the same issues as people who commit any crimes. In my personal case, I grew up without the lessons that I needed to develop the right kind of character. And people are under the misunderstanding that we are wealthy. And it's true that most of us were well off at one point, by and large. If we're getting prosecuted, most of us are not well off anymore. Our money's either being seized, it's being forfeited. We're spending all of our money on lawyers. Our families are breaking up. Our children are estranged from our children. And I can appreciate why people don't want to develop empathy for people prosecuted for white collar crimes. I've been at parties and social gatherings. I lived in Greenwich for a long time, and there are people at those gatherings who wouldn't talk to me. And I am sure that the reason that they don't want to talk to me doesn't have anything to do with me. It only has to do with them. And if they come to me for help, I'm happy to give it to them. But it's not my job to try to convince anybody of anything. My job is to...
Right. And in a way, the question is flawed because the group is not trying to seek the public's mercy. The group is just trying to help each other to find a way to be more of a productive citizen, right? Because a lot of people don't realize that felons in this country, they have very few options, few ways out. And by turning your back on a felon, you're leaving that person with very few options to succeed. And I think this group is great in a way because you are trying to capture these people, like you said, in that moment when they are fresh out of college, right? Fresh out of jail or something, and they have to start over.
Yeah.
And that is a very crucial time in their lives when they could either go back into the life of crime because they have very few options, or they could start from the ground up again, right? Be the janitor, work your way up. And that's what this group is about, right? It's not about seeking the public's mercy, right?
And, we live in this liminal space where we have one foot in the old world and one foot in the new world.
So now comes a question that I've been curious about. How did you regain your law license back? I mean, what an amazing comeback.
Well, what happened for me is that I was now a minister and I was now a CEO of a criminal justice nonprofit. And I decided that, what people really needed was a lawyer to trust. I mean, there was a hole in the market because there were a lot of criminal defense attorneys, but there was nobody who had lived experience and really understood all of the nuances of things that were going around in someone's life when they get arrested and prosecuted for white collar crime. Because there's a lot of issues. There's bankruptcies and corporate dissolutions and divorces and all kinds of things going on. So I said, maybe I'll try to get my law license back. And I put my application in and I had to run the gauntlet. And here's the crazy thing. I mean, I had worked for 15 years donating my time, volunteering, being a minister, doing all of those things. And I didn't really know that I wanted to get my law license back. I was just doing what I felt was God's work and putting one foot in front of the other. But when I went to put my law application in and I got interviewed, I had my hearing and all of that work that I had put in, all of that service work, all of that volunteer work, that's what they were interested in. They were looking to see if I was a changed person, and they were shocked that I had been willing to put all that work in for 15 years and not get paid for it. And in May of 2021, I found out that the court had granted my motion for reinstatement, and I've hit the ground running ever since. And so I spend about half my time actually representing clients, and maybe the other half of my time still ministering and being of service to the white collar support group.
And that comeback is probably what defines you now, right? Not the worst moment in your life.
I hope so. I can tell you that I'm not without my own demons, right? I mean, this is a traumatic experience, but I feel like I've been revalidated on a lot of levels, and it's certainly, I feel like my children look up to me again. I'm not Dad the felon. I'm not Dad the guy who was in prison. I'm Dad the lawyer. That's not bad. Also, it helps to now kind of be no longer in a low barrier of entry situation. Now I'm back in a high barrier of entry situation where I'm doing things that not everyone else gets to do. And I couldn't be happier. I'm more happy now than I was before all this happened.